The Metaverse is emerging as the next big technology platform and promises to be the next frontier for human experiences on the internet. Into the Metaverse covers companies, technologies, and trends that are bringing these promises to life. Join creator and host Jonathan Ross-Friedman, founder and CEO of Supersocial, as he interviews the brilliant minds that are building, shaping, and investing in the Metaverse.
Welcome to Into the Metaverse. I'm here with Priya. We're really excited to talk about all that is new in the Metaverse this week. Priya, great to see you again.
Yon, it is great to see you again. Always great to talk. I want to jump right in with what Mark Zuckerberg has been telling his employees post Vision Pro launch, right? He has been saying that, they've done nothing new over there at Apple. What do you think? True?
Well, he has to, first of all, acknowledge the great work that Apple has done. And I think he has acknowledged some of the work that they've done. Ultimately, as we talked about previously, it greatly serves his cause about the Metaverse and the investment they're making in their Reality Labs division. Having said that, he obviously needed to explain to his team his approach on what they're doing that is different. And part of that was to also say, we've kind of been working on it for a while, and I haven't seen anything that Apple has done that to me represents a whole different paradigm shift. He's really basically alluding to, in my mind, Apple is competing with us. They're doing something very similar. They are trying to tap into the same audience, but they're going about it in a different way than we do. And he said something really interesting, which is all of the demos that Apple showed in the presentation of Vision Pro was about people sitting mostly isolated, mostly on their own in their living room with the Vision Pro on their head. And he said, that's not the world we want to create at Meta. At Meta, it's all about, social experience, being together, doing things together. Now, I don't know if that means you need to be in the same room together, because to be honest, it doesn't matter if you wear a Vision Pro or an Oculus Quest. You're still going to be wearing a headset and you don't really need anyone around you physically. It doesn't really make any difference unless we're talking about more augmented experiences with content overlay or physical surrounding, and then you can actually see people around you, which is something that Apple's technology enables versus, MetaQuest that doesn't enable that sort of transparency that you can actually see people, the pass-through exactly, or I think they call it, in the Vision Pro, they call it eyesight. And so Zuckerberg is doing what he needs to do, which is tell these team that, great, I haven't seen anything new, and we're on the right course. We're building something different. We're creating a world that is different, and let's stay the course on that.
Well, he has a lot of work to do to build up employee morale after the many, many thousands of layoffs that we've seen there in recent months, right? It's been 9 months of turbulence for their company. One difference that you point out on LinkedIn in a post that you'd written, I saw, was that we're talking about open source versus closed source here.
Yeah, and I think that's another thing that we talked about previously, that I believe Zuckerberg is taking on a whole different strategy. And to be honest, he kind of has to. You can't beat Apple in Apple's game, right? Google managed with Android to create quite a significant mobile business because they've made Android open source that any device maker can access, no matter where they are, no matter what device they're building. High-end like Samsung, or low-end like other device makers like Xiaomi, et cetera, in China or in other countries. I think Zuckerberg understands that the only way he can compete is by going after that sort of open ecosystem where he builds essentially a MetaQuest, a VR operating system that is very much modeled after the Google Android operating system. It's going to be open source. He envisions many more device makers who potentially would use the Oculus and the Horizon world as kind of the main form factor, digital form factor that people are integrating their software into their devices. And I think it's because he understands that he doesn't have the history of Apple in terms of building end-to-end computing components. He doesn't have the track record. He also most likely doesn't have that amount of cash that Apple has been deploying. And this is something that I think is important in terms of the morale that you've mentioned. Not only that Apple has launched a device that have really generated extraordinary excitement from a wide community. Even those who are skeptic about the Vision Pro still said, wow, this is quite impressive. Unclear if it's a mainstream product, but Apple launched something in a way that only Apple launches, only Apple knows how to launch. And so I think it's a few things. It's that, and he needed to manage morale. They laid off thousands of people. And also anyone working on the Reality Labs division at Meta have seen investors ambushing Meta over the last year about criticizing Meta about the level of investment. And the reality is that, and I think I've mentioned that somewhere at some point, the amount of capital that Meta invested in VR sounds like a lot, but it's probably not enough. They probably need to invest much more in order for them to have a real chance in competing with Apple in creating a computing ecosystem that will rival that of what Apple is creating.
One of the things that struck me as a little hypocritical when we were hearing so much about Meta losing $10 billion on its Reality Labs division was at the same time, there was a very small amount of reporting that was dedicated to the fact that Amazon had also lost $10 billion over its Alexa devices. And so there definitely was a piling on for Meta because they took on this huge sort of visionary approach of changing their branding, changing their name, changing their focus. Let's turn to another partnership, LVMH and Epic Games. This really sets some new table stakes for the industry. Tell me about what's happening here.
This is so exciting because I think a lot of people have noticed that one of the sectors in the consumer segment that have really been at the forefront over the last 3 years with regards to virtual worlds, gaming experiences, and so on and so forth has been sort of the fashion and the beauty world, inclusive of luxury segment within those categories. And LVMH is the world's largest luxury conglomerate, anywhere from drinks, like Moet Chandon and Hennessy and so on and so forth, to fashion. They own Dior, among other brands, and beauty, right? And so it is fascinating to see LVMH at a group level. It's not any particular of their houses. LVMH as a group signed quite a comprehensive, or announced a comprehensive partnership with Epic Games. And it's not about one specific area of what Epic Games does. It's a partnership with Epic Games as a company, as a platform, with access to all of Epic's tools, from MetaHuman, which is their sort of almost like photorealistic avatar creation software, to the Unreal Engine, and so on and so forth. And if you look at the press release from LVMH, it really goes across all of the houses of LVMH, TBD exactly what examples are going to come out. But it goes across all of the houses or maisons of LVMH, but also in multiple different use cases. They're talking about digital virtual fashion shows. They're talking about virtual and virtual world experiences, likely potentially even gaming, maybe things that are integrated into Fortnite Creative. They're talking about digital twins. They're talking about design processes, right? And we know that the Unreal Engine today is used not just to create games and video games at a high quality, but also they powered some of the production of Mandalorian, the TV show from Disney+. They power car manufacturers who want to work together in a collaborative manner. So this is kind of a one-of-a-kind, and I assume one of a few we'll see in the near future, where one of the world's largest luxury brand group is essentially partnering with Epic Games to work on multiple different products and experiences and serving different needs of LVMH as an organization, from things that touch the consumers to things that will be available to employees that we may not even think of as consumer experiences. And as that, I think it's a trailblazing partnership, and I'm very excited to see what LVMH as a group is going to create.
You always say that the metaverse is not about 3D devices. That is not what it is. It can be accessed in a number of ways. And you also say that the metaverse is not yet here. It is evolving. It is coming. You like the term, but it is kind of this next generation of the internet. There's a new announcement about Improbable and M2 launching a multitude of metaverses, and they say they're going to give Meta and Microsoft a run for their money. What do you see here? Is this a viable pathway? Do you think we're going to see some growth out of this company?
Well, Improbable is a company that raised hundreds of millions of dollars from some of the world's largest investors, like SoftBank. It's a company that has been around for about 10 or 11 years, and it's a company that have been building essentially the infrastructure for virtual worlds at scale. Folks have seen the demos that they've showed with Yuga Labs and working with them on the other side, which is Yuga's kind of, as they call it, Roblox for adults, powered by Improbable's technology to enable essentially thousands of people who are interacting in one server or one virtual world at a time, and really kind of showing how a virtual world can be a place for thousands of people to congregate together in concerts or games and so on and so forth. And Improbable, I think has been struggling, over the last few years to prove and show that companies are actually using their technology. If you think about the largest companies in the category at the moment, it's Roblox, Fortnite Creative with Epic Games technology, Minecraft. None of them are using Improbable technology. And so I'm very curious with this new announcement where they are claiming to compete, to going directly against Microsoft, against, other companies. Meta and Microsoft are specifically mentioned. I'm curious at what exactly that means, and the M Squared platform that they're launching as a separate business entity. It's really going to be an infrastructure that will enable developers to build those next generation experiences. And so, Priya, it goes back again to something we talked about a lot, which I think there are a lot of companies that are trying to build the infrastructure for the next generation of creators. And I think ultimately this is something that companies like Roblox and Epic, who have been around, have been building these ecosystems for such a long time, are ahead of the curve when it comes to driving that innovation forward, especially as building those scaled infrastructure really takes a lot of time and a lot of money. And it's not just time and money, it's like building a thriving ecosystem of developers who are passionate about the technology, who know how to build and want to continue in building that ecosystem is potentially the most difficult challenge for any, quote unquote marketplace. And I think Improbable has ambition. It's great. No one is ever going to blame anyone for not having enough ambition. So they're going after Meta. They're going after Microsoft. I also think it's a bit confusing. Like, what do they mean exactly? They're going after Meta and Microsoft. Microsoft is not really in the playing field of consumers. Meta is really only focusing on consumers. And so it's a bit tricky and unclear on who is their audience from developer standpoint, what type of experiences they envision these developers creating. There's not much in the news that we've read. And so I think there's a bit more information that is required in order to really understand what is the strategy of Improbable when they're thinking about a statement like, we're going to compete against Microsoft, we're going to compete against Meta in enabling infrastructure for, and this is another buzzword that we've heard before, interoperable network of 3D metaverses. So a couple of things on that. First of all, everyone agrees that the broader long-term vision of the metaverse is that it's open and it's interoperable. We talked about it. I want to be able to access those different worlds, if it's from Roblox or Fortnite or other companies, in a way that is open and I can carry my identity and my assets with me. Okay, so I get that. That's very ambitious. That's exciting. Now, how do you do that? How do you do that at scales? You're going to have to play with other platforms as well. It's not going to be one platform that is completely new, that is building a new developer ecosystem that is doing it. The other thing is, I kind of get confused every time that people talk about metaverses as plural. There's no metaverses. There could only be one metaverse, which is essentially the evolution or the successor of the internet. Just like we don't have internets, right? I've never heard anyone come and say, I'm going to go to I really need to get into the internets, right? Maybe in some comedy show by someone I like, but I've never heard anyone talk about the internet in plural. So I don't subscribe to worldview or their metaverses, right? Roblox is not a metaverse. Epic's Fortnite Creative is not a metaverse in my mind. It's a prototype of what a metaverse could look like potentially if it's really open at its scale and interoperable. These are definitely platforms that provide a sense of immersion in what a metaverse environment can enable you to do, right? And Roblox in and of itself enables interoperability inside its platform, right? But I don't believe we're going to have metaverses. We might have galaxies or metaverses or virtual world platforms and so on and so forth. But when people talk about the metaverse, there could only be one large, at scale, open, interoperable succession of the internet, or the internet in 3D.
Spatial computing, as we keep hearing as well. Yana, all of these words, though, and the terminology reminds me once again of how much we're at the infancy of these technologies. People don't even know what to call them or How do we refer to them? Metaverses, plural, not. So it's interesting to see where it goes as we start to find the language to describe the worlds that are being created right now. And also, as we saw at the beginning of the web, you don't know who ends up coming out ahead. AOL was huge for so long, right? And then they fell back. So some of these companies that we hear about, we'll see 2-3 years on where they go.
And I think that this is why you're seeing the level of investments from companies that have the balance sheet to do that, because they don't really know. They are trying to create the future. They have the money to try and create the future. They also recognize that historically, a lot of disruptive innovation came from new entrants, even though Apple is a company that, alongside Microsoft, really ushered the new era of personal computing, only to decline significantly, almost died as a company. Steve Jobs came back, they reinvented the Mac with the iMac, right? And then they launched the iPod, and then they launched the iPhone. That really propelled Apple to a whole new stratosphere as a company, more than they could have ever imagined. But that doesn't mean that Apple is necessarily going to be the company. And interesting thing is, I just came back a couple of days ago from a vacation with my wife, and I had a chance to do quite a long trip with a Tesla. And it was the longest trip I've ever taken with a Tesla. And as I was driving, I was explaining to my wife what is happening. And I told her, we're actually driving on a computer on 4 wheels. This is a computer. This is not a car. We are accidentally moving like a car, but we are sitting in a computer. And so I think when people think about all of those gates, we have silos of how we think about devices today. All of that is going to be so interesting to see how the metaverse is basically going to break that. Because just like the internet, we're going to access the metaverse or the next version of the internet from so many new form factors that we did not imagine until today, including autonomous vehicles. As I like to say, what do you think you're going to do when your Tesla is autonomous?
Yeah.
You're probably going to access the metaverse.
And I just saw that BMW has incorporated ChatGPT into its operating system as well. So it is a whole new world. I appreciate that you are out there to help guide us through it. The analysis is always great because you go behind the headlines and help us understand what is happening and the connections that we should be making here. So Yon, thank you as always.
Thanks, Priya. It's been fun. See you next week.
Ciao.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Into the Metaverse. We hope you learned a lot and explored new aspects of the metaverse.